afternoon, everyone. We're going to delay the panel just a few more minutes, if you don't mind. Thank you so much for those of you who made it back and are here. But we're hearing that there is a line at lunch, and a lot of people got stuck at lunch. So our speakers came all this way to do this, so we wanted to make sure we have everyone in here. So just please be patient, and we'll take a few more minutes to wait for those to get back from lunch, and then we'll get started. Thank you.
Well, obviously people aren't getting back from lunch, but we wanted to get started. A couple of announcements. I did want to share with all of you that Larry Broughton, at his website, broughtonadvisory.com, on the first Friday of every month, he hosts a virtual jam session at 9 a.m. Pacific Central Time, and it's geared towards current and inspiring entrepreneurs. I think it's a good, I've listened in on it. What they do is they allow an individual to present a challenging problem they're having with their business, and they discuss it, and they have experts that are usually on the line that will address this during the jam session. So for faculty, for programs where you have entrepreneurship programs, for Veterans Resource Centers, I think that's a good resource to have, so I just wanted to share that with you. Again, it's broughtonadvisory.com. And what we were showing before this session was a live TV feed at KUSI, which is a local TV station. They showed up yesterday morning. We were all in general session, but they were walking around the exhibit hall. And so I just wanted to share that that's what that was. What we were showing you were the YouTube clips. So with that, I'm going to bring up Linda Frank, and she's going to introduce the next panel. So thank you all for eating a quick Starbucks sandwich and coming back into the...
Good afternoon. Could I have the panel members come up, please? I'm very pleased to introduce this afternoon's panel on the Veterans Opportunity to Work Act. And as they're coming up, from your left to right, is Dr. Karen Gross. She's president of Southern Vermont College. Dr. Gross spent 2012 at the U.S. Department of Education as a senior policy advisor. Mr. Curtis Coy is a Deputy Undersecretary for Economic Opportunity with the Department of Veterans Affairs. Mr. Coy retired in 1994 from the Navy as a commander in the Supply Corps after beginning his military career as an enlisted service member in the Air Force and a member of the 1975 graduating class at the U.S. Naval Academy. Mr. Robert Carrington is a Special Assistant to the Director for Private Sector Engagement Transition to Veterans Policy Office in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Mr. Carrington is a retired Army officer. He was twice deployed as a DoD civilian to Iraq and Afghanistan, where he did governance and development work. They are going to do their presentation, and then there'll be some time for questions afterwards. And now I'll turn it over to Dr. Gross.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everyone. It's very nice to be with you. I first want to say that the slides you're going to see at the beginning represent crosswalking. And before I started with the government, I didn't realize that crosswalking had a meaning other than that which you did when you went from one side of a street to another. So I hope you'll appreciate those slides. I do need to say that the views I'm expressing here are my own, not those of the Department of Education. I'm here in my capacity as a college president, so I just want to make sure that I've done the right legal bit here. And I should say, just as a matter of good humor, that in addition to being with the government for the past years, I had my bangs in place before the First Lady. All right. So here are the crosswalking slides. Clever, huh? So let me talk a little bit about the VOW Act and how it came into being, and then my particular experience working on the Transition Assistance Program. So the president gave a speech at the Washington Navy Yard in August of 2011. And in that speech, as is quoted on the slide, he talked about the importance of helping service members when they transitioned from military life to civilian life. And then, by the way, in July of 2012, he gave an added speech at the Veterans of Foreign Wars annual meeting, in which he talked about the importance of what he called reboot camp, which, by the way, is a term some people do not like, but in any event, he used that term to describe the new Transition Assistance Program. And in November of 2011, a law was passed called the Veterans Opportunity to Work Act, or the VOW to Hire Heroes Act, as it's often referred to, which went into effect in November of 2012. So there was a one-year window in which to implement an entire transition assistance program for service men and women. And that was not the only feature, by the way, of the VOW Act. You'll hear a little bit about that in a minute. But what was important is that's a very short time window to have an interagency task force that designs basically a curriculum for 1.4 million men and women. And what we wanted to do is not only design the program, but pilot test the program, and then learn from that pilot to inform the version that went into effect in November of 2012. And you can just picture that this not only involved the design of the program, the design of empirical assessment, and the pilot testing, but getting all the services ready, which you'll hear about, to engage in this effort. The task force that created the revised Transition Assistance Program included and was led by the Departments of Veterans Affairs and the Department of Defense. But in addition to those two leaders, there were representatives from the following additional government agencies: the Department of Labor, the Department of Education, the Small Business Administration, the Domestic Policy Council, the National Security Staff, and then representatives from each of the services, including the National Guard and the Reserve. So those were one representative of each, sat around a table at an executive steering committee to do this interagency work within a year. And I just want to share with you a little bit, for me, what that transition was like, because I think it gives you an insight into the process by which, and the thoughtful process by which the Transition Assistance Program was redesigned. So I moved into this position from being a college president. I, in essence, was seconded by the government for a year. And it was a big enough transition, frankly, to go from being a college president to working for the government, the Department of Education. But it was yet another level of change to work on this interagency task force. And many of you who've worked in government know that interagency task force are frequently regarded as the most difficult work in government and the most difficult to find a solution. And so in this sense, this effort allowed me to not only understand how the Department of Education worked, this was in addition to other work I did for the department, but also to work with agency partners as together we created this new program. In addition to struggling with acronyms, which was no small issue, particularly military acronyms, I learned a lot about military culture. And even though my two fathers and my husband had served in the military, I have to say that until I actually got on this task force, I barely understood anything about military culture. And while there's still plenty for me to learn, I was generously educated by the members of that committee so that I could better understand how military culture worked and what educational opportunities would most benefit the servicemen and women. And Mr. Coy here was one of those people who regularly helped me to understand the military and military culture. But similarly, the people on that committee had to learn about educational culture. And that was a transition for them too. And so much as I was transitioning, and then talking about transitioning of service members, the people in this group had to become accustomed to the language that I used as we talked about how to create an educational program. So words like pedagogy and educative and the like, as well as curriculum development and similar items, and I frequently talked about education as a three-legged stool where you needed not only content, but quality pedagogy and psychosocial readiness. This was a transition, too, for the people around that table. I think the other sort of amazing feature of what I learned in this process, which differs from academia, was the speed with which this had to be done by statute, and then the complex issues about how to finance it. And so those were difficult issues that undergirded this whole process. But let me say this about the whole interagency effort. I came to Washington wondering about the quality of people with whom I would be working, wondering about whether things could actually be accomplished, and not feeling, frankly, particularly patriotic. And all of those were changed by virtue of this interagency task force. I worked with remarkable, truly remarkable men and women, from Army generals to chiefs of staff to deputy undersecretaries. We produced a remarkable product within a year, and many people have called it the best interagency effort that has existed. And lastly, I'm immensely proud of what we've produced. I think it will help our service men and women be career ready, of which education, further education, is a big piece of that. And so in that context, I'm not only proud of the work product, but I feel very proud of the work we did to help our servicemen and women. So with that, I turn it over to Kurt.
Thank you, Karen. I still don't know what pedagogy means, but we all, I was on the task force with my now good friend Karen, and she's absolutely right. It was a culture shock. If you can imagine, most of the folks in VA at relatively senior levels are veterans themselves, and so they've grown up in a sort of the military culture, and that's sort of passed into the Department of Veterans Affairs. And so you can well imagine that we all know our acronyms and so on, and Karen came in and quickly schooled us on pedagogies and the like. And you have no idea how Karen changed in many ways the focus of this task force. You got to remember that this task force was made up of almost essentially all senior executives and or flag officers from the Army, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, Marines. And so the idea that you had all of these agencies coming to the table at once, creating the product of this task force, which is, as Karen indicated, has sort of been held up as the benchmark of interagency task force. Few task forces have done as much as this one did in particular in such a short amount of time. The VOW to Hire Heroes Act was, as Karen indicated, it was signed by the President on the 21st of November of 2011. And essentially, if you think of the VOW to Hire Heroes Act, it's in sort of 4 sections. There are well over 20 sections in the VOW to Hire Heroes Act. There's lots of different pieces in there, but there's sort of 4 big pieces in it. One big piece was the tax credits for hiring veterans, anywhere from $2,400 to $9,600. There was a number of provisions in there that extended vocational rehabilitation programs and a sort of hodgepodge of other things. There was the mandatory transition assistance program, which our good friend Robert is going to talk a little bit about, and then there was the VOW to Hire Heroes Act, which I'm going to talk about. Most of you by now, I hope, have heard of the VOW to Hire Heroes Act, or VRAP as we call it. But as Karen indicated, just think for 1 second, the President signed this legislation on 21 November 2011, and we started taking applications for this program on 15 May of 2012. Less than 6 months later, we began accepting applications for an entirely new program. It is an incredible testament to the folks in Rob's organization that we put this together in partnership with the Department of Labor. Again, it goes back to the partnerships that we had not created, but we had made better through this task force that we were able to do this. The VRAP program is an incredible program and has become incredibly successful. However, when we started the VRAP program, no one knew how to spell VRAP. We were not given a huge budget for outreach. We went out to you all. We went out to VSOs. We went out to everybody that we could conceivably think of to ask them for their help in getting the word out to unemployed veterans between the ages of 35 and 60. As of this morning, we've had over 102,000 applications. As of this morning, we have approved 85,600 unemployed veterans for the program, and we currently have about 35,000 folks enrolled in various programs. The thing that this program does, quite frankly, is if you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics data, about 75% of all unemployed veterans are over the age of 35. That's pretty shocking to most people because the stereotype is not that. 75% of unemployed veterans are over the age of 35. So what this program does is hit that sweet spot, because if you look at the number of veterans out there that are unemployed that meet this age criteria and have no GI Bill benefits, it allows them to start a new career in a high-demand occupation. And there are 209,000 high-demand occupations that they can choose from at a 2-year school or technical environment. And so it's an incredibly successful program. Now let me give you a couple other pieces to this program and challenges. I mentioned that we have had over 102,000 applications. We've got 85,000 folks approved. We have 35,000 folks going to school, which means we have 50,000 veterans who have been approved for the program and are not going to school. A huge challenge when you consider that VRAP is a 2-year program. The last check we can write for VRAP is in March of 2014. And so if you think about it, if you begin your program of study in April of 2013, just in a month or so, you're going to have 11 months of benefits, then 10 and 9 and so on and so forth. And so it's an interesting challenge that we now got the word out to veterans to be able to apply for the program, but now we have to translate that into veterans actually making sure that they use the program before the program expires, which leads me to the next slide. And there are currently 2 pieces of legislation for VRAP that's out there. One is in the Senate side, and what they want to do is they want to extend the program and they want to add another 50,000 slots. Not so sure how that's going to be paid for, but that's one piece of legislation which I'm sure we'll go and will be required to testify. The second is on the House side, and that's just simply extending the program out till June 30th of 2014. Again, we would end up testifying. I'm not going to take a stance one way or the other because we've got to prepare for that testimony. But just know that the program is incredibly popular on the Hill, and we've testified so far 3 times on this program alone. Probably we'll be doing a 4th very, very shortly to talk about these 2 pieces of legislation. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Robert to talk about some of the challenges that we've been having, and we say we collectively, because the VA is very much involved in the mandatory TAP program. But one of the things, just as an aside, when Karen was talking about the Presidential Task Force, the task force was formed to study, look at, and try and provide recommendations on what kind of actions could the administration take to help veterans' unemployment rates. What it morphed into and quickly became the central point of the task force was the Transition Assistance Program. So it was beginning to look at that before the law was even passed and signed into law by the President. But there's some huge challenges. Robert's going to talk about it. I'll just give you a perspective from the VA point of view. Last year, VA did about, we provided Transition Assistance Program briefings to about 140,000 folks. Now that it's mandatory, and it was voluntary, now that it's mandatory, it looks to be that we're going to be required to provide briefings to around 300,000 folks. So we've doubled the customer base of our Transition Assistance Program briefings. On top of that, as Robert will indicate, we're trying very hard not to have any of these programs with over 50 people. Divide 300,000 by 50 people. You can see the size and scope of what Robert's going to talk about and the challenges that both DOD has and VA has and the Department of Labor has. So with that, Robert, I'll turn it over to you.
Can I interrupt for 1 second and just add to that before Robert speaks? If you think about that from an educative standpoint, you also need much more training for the people who are doing the work with the servicemen and women. So it isn't just that the number of people taking it increased, the number of people who need a training program for that is high. And also, one has to realize that not all of this can be delivered in brick and mortar. There has to be a virtual piece to it as well, which augmented the challenges, not only of programmatic design, but programmatic implementation.
So the first time in 19 years, White House interest, congressional legislation, and DOD leadership proposed some significant changes to what we used to know as TAP. We now know as Transition Goals, Plans, and Success. And Transition Goals, Plans, Success, as it was indicated earlier, is a mandatory, standardized method that the services go through to better prepare the service members to transition out of the military, meeting a common career readiness standard so that when they leave the military, they'll have a much greater success rate at getting a job, being successful in college, attending technical training, or starting their own business. So the 4 basic subcomponents of Transition GPS starts with the pre-separation counseling, and mind you, that in the past was the only mandatory portion of TAP. So it's significant in the sense that we've greatly increased the program. We've improved it through some processes that we're all going to talk about, and in addition to making it mandatory, with the complete focus on, are the service members career ready when they leave the military? So they're career ready when they're in the military because we spend a lot of time training and preparing them. We want to ensure that we spend that same level of effort to prepare and train them for them being career ready when they leave the military. So everything you do in the military helps you when you leave the military. So I'd already talked about the pre-separation. The next subcomponent is the core curriculum, and I'm not going to go down through every single portions and parts of that, but it includes the VA benefits briefings that Kurt mentioned. So instead of doing it to an auditorium of 500 people, they provide it in a classroom setting of classes no larger than 50 personnel. Likewise, not only is that portion mandatory, but the DOL employment workshop, same guidance from Congress in the form of law and now policy within DOD that we had to have into DOD policy by 21 November of 2012, which we did, based on the work of the task force and the support of DOD leadership. So there's a range of subcomponents in the core curriculum that better prepare the service member and their families for the transition. Spouses, obviously, are encouraged by DOD policy to participate and attend. So in addition to the 300,000 that Kurt mentions that the VA has to train, add in the spouses and other significant others to that training. But we view in the department that it's not just a service member transitioning, it's the military family that's transitioning into the civilian career. In addition to the parts of the core curriculum, there's transition GPS tracks, and those are the technical training track, education track, and entrepreneurship tracks. And in a sense, they're mandatory only with regards to whether or not the service member can meet career readiness standards, attending or not having attended those tracks. We would hope that if Carrington, for instance, had never gone to college before, never applied, that he would be a good candidate to send to the education track. Why? We want to make sure that Carrington's successful in using his education benefits, makes good choices about what college to go to, where, what to study in college, what the outcome might be after that college. The tracks are followed at the end with a capstone activity, and we envision that as a mandatory one-on-one session with a commander or a member of the command team that ensures the service member has done everything they can possibly do to successfully transition out of the military, verifies the attainment of career readiness standards, does this 90 days out so that if some of those standards aren't met, they are retrained and sent back to the providers. And lastly, the capstone event incorporates a warm handoff to our partner agencies, Labor, Veterans Affairs, if there was an education rep there or some education counselor that would also provide that information. Kurt, Karen, anything else that you'd like to say about either the benefits briefing or the tracks?
With respect to the VA, Robert talked about it, but think about this as well. We basically have 3 tracks going on this year at once because the law required us to do mandatory TAP or transition GPS or mandatory TAP for all service members effective 21 November of 2012, a year after the President signed the law. And so we have what we used to do, or what we still used to do, the old TAP, some call it death by PowerPoint, 110 some odd PowerPoint slides. Then the new TAP that we've been developing and piloting this year. And then we have the GPS transition program that Robert's talking about there, that we're also sort of meshing into our benefits brief and so on and so forth. So we're sort of running on 3 different tracks all at once to ensure that those service members are given a transition assistance program across the board.
Let me pick up and just chat a little bit about how this was designed. The core curriculum is made up of a number of modules that were designed by different agencies. And the other members of the Executive Steering Committee had an opportunity to look at each of those and provide input so that they were integrative. And so they didn't appear to the service member as if he or she were getting something totally disconnected. So while they were prepared by the VA or Department of Defense or others, they are integrated in terms of theme. And the continuous theme is employment readiness. And a subcategory of that is the training that's needed to get employment ready and the use of military skills being crosswalked to civilian skills or academic credit to allow for that career readiness. If you then get to those 3, quote, optional tracks, the technical training track and the education track both involve institutions of higher learning. The technical training track could be at a community college or a certificate granting institution designed to help certain of the service members who do not want a 4-year degree, at least not now, to be ready to participate in some continuing form of education that will make them career ready. The goal in these tracks is to help the servicemen and women select the right institution that will serve them well, that will allow them to use their veterans benefits to the best use possible, rather than repeating courses or getting courses that don't lead to career readiness. And in the education track, there's a significant piece of it addressing not just selection of an institution, but financing higher education, which means not only thinking about the benefits that come from the VA in terms of the post-9/11 GI Bill, but also in terms of other federal financial aid that can help support servicemen and women. So those tracks are designed to help servicemen and women make wise choices and thoughtful choices about how to further their career goals via education. And the entrepreneurship track, which actually could also have an educative piece in terms of enabling course credit for this entrepreneurship course, is designed to let servicemen and women decide whether they want to start a business, but it's actually built in separate modules, so you can start to see if you're even interested, then take a slightly longer course, and then if you're truly interested, take a way longer course. And then I just want to speak about the capstone at the end. From an educational perspective, the idea of a, quote, warm handoff is important because that's what will connect the service member with a real live person who can help them. Now, I just want to talk for a minute about the virtual world. There is an effort to convert all of this into a virtual environment. We started with a synchronous virtual world, and we're moving to an asynchronous virtual world. The challenges are significant, but there are many service members who, when they exit, are not in a location where they can get brick and mortar education, or they're stationed abroad or on a ship or something. And so the effort has been made to make sure that the quality of the virtual product mirrors the quality of the brick and mortar product. And it's the Army who's actually taken the lead so far in designing both the synchronous and asynchronous virtual worlds.
Just to make a couple more comments. So all the components of the transition GPS are there in place to assist a service member in meeting career readiness standards. So example, in the core curriculum, there's a financial education planning portion, and the outcome of that is a 12-month post-separation budget that a service member has to provide to his transition counselor and chain of command that shows that they have some realization of what life is going to be like after they take off the uniform with regards to finances. So all those different components or subcomponents, if you will, lead to the attainment of attaining career readiness standards. So I talked to you about the mandatory transition GPS and the portions of it. After we have this all set in place, the next step is to make it transition into a military life cycle focus, if you will. So that at initial entry training, you come in and you have some idea what it is you're training up to do in the military and where you're going to do that and how you're going to progress through the military. So all service members have a IDP, individual development plan. So they continue the military career following that plan and updating it as they get new assignments, as they deploy, as they go to higher level training in schools, until finally they decide that I'm going to retire or separate from the military, or in the case of the reserve components, come off of a 180-day or longer deployment set of active duty orders. Then the service member takes the IDP and it becomes the ITP, Individual Transition Plan, with a focus on accomplishing those various things you need to do to attain career readiness standards to successfully transition out of the military. So a service member makes a decision on what my particular goal might be. And to reach that goal, I do an assessment and figure out I need to go to technical training and how I might be successful in doing that. And they continue to make updates to the individual transition plan starting at the 2-year point prior to transitioning out. So that gives them a window of opportunity to do everything they need to do to be ready to transition out of the military. Lastly, and this is a very important note to end on, at least with this chart, is this was a result of an interagency effort, unique in the sense that it actually significantly accomplished a radical change in the transition program that work collectively amongst the VA, labor, DOD, education, small business administration, which developed the entrepreneurship track, and the Office of Personal Management, which we hadn't mentioned yet, but is very involved in the portion of the DOL employment workshop for those service members who want to focus on federal opportunities for employment.
Let me just add that to just show you the kind of thing I would do when I was sitting on the task force, I really appreciate in the last bullet that education was mentioned. I would ask that we amend the slide for its prospective use to put us there in writing. That's the kind of thing I would have pointed at.
Thanks, Karen.
And most of the rest of us on the panel would go, is that a good thing? And somebody would go, yeah, I think that was a good thing. So let me just make one or two other comments, and because I've been doing this for quite a while, but this interagency idea is pretty incredulous when you think about it. Most of, there's a good chunk of our friends out here in the audience that are veterans. And most people would say, DOD, we're warriors, we train, we fight, we win wars, and that's it. Secretary Shinseki made it very clear at the very beginning of this process that basically he said, you know, we spent 2 or 3 months training folks and kids to be soldiers and sailors and Marines and airmen. And then at the other end, we spend a day or two and we out-process them. And we owe them more than that. And folks looked at this and kind of said, that's exactly right. So we're getting more and more at what we call in VA to the left of the DD-214. We're getting involved with service members before they become, if you will, official veterans. The other thing that this task force led to was renewed emphasis or other task forces. Another one would be the White House Task Force on credentialing that they're doing now. There's a number of other efforts. And one of the other things, as Karen indicated and Robert talked about, is what are we doing to help ensure that our service members / veterans are being successful as they go down the road to be employment ready. One of the things that we have put a considerable emphasis on is ensuring that our veterans are successful on campus. That's one of the things that we've done in VA is develop a Vet Success on Campus, which puts a VRE counselor on a campus full-time. An experienced VRE counselor on a campus full-time. We started out with a pilot of about 8 sites. We are now up to 32 sites, and we're adding another, hopefully, 52 or so counselors this year and another unspecified amount of counselors next year. It has a very strong following. I was out, for example, this morning at San Diego State University with President Hirshhorn, and it's the second time I've met with him to see firsthand that Vet Success on Campus success that we're doing at San Diego State University. We also look at employment ready and what kind of things, and a lot of this came out of the task force as adjunct efforts to the task force, and that is vetsuccess.gov. It's a website that we try and we like to think is going to link and help veterans provide their resumes across the board so employers that are seeking veteran employees can go to this one place and find those veteran resumes. We're investing a good chunk of money. We hope to be rolling out some significant enhancements to this coming summer, so it's incredibly important. We're also working with a number of veteran support services and VSOs with respect to what we're doing on campus and those efforts. One of the things I would shout out and call out to is the California State University system. We met with them last year. We're continuing to want to work with them. They are very aggressive in wanting to ensure that our student veterans and student service members on those campuses are successful. And we're doing a whole lot of new things and different things and innovative things that over the course of time we're going to share more and more with our friends at CCME.
So let me add that one of the other benefits of this task force was to enable these agencies to share the efforts that they each were undertaking in this space that may not have been fully on the radar of other government agencies. So there's now a real effort to sort of think about what I'd call a gap analysis that Kurt's working on to see where the efforts that, say, the Department of Education is engaged in can be leveraged with those that the VA is involved in. So let me just take a moment to share some of the efforts that the Department of Education has been involved in and where we see some synergies with the Department of Veterans Affairs. So the Department of Education has actually been involved in the military set of issues, from military-connected children to military families to DoD schools, all the way through adult education. So one of the things that happened under Secretary Arne Duncan is to have a grant priority for military families and servicemen and women. And the department also offers an Iraq and Afghanistan service grant should there be children who survive a father or mother who died while in service if they were then enrolled in college. The Department of Education, under its FIPSE grants, which are its post-secondary education grants, funded 15 centers of excellence for veteran student success. These centers are cohesive efforts to help vets on America's campuses. And you can go to the website and see the 15 campuses, which range from community colleges to four-year colleges, both for-profit and non-profit. The Department of Education also funds Veterans Upward Bound program, which is taking the regular Upward Bound program, which helps underserved high school students. There's now a veterans version of it that helps veterans become ready to access higher education through course readiness, skill readiness, applications to college, and financing. We've participated with the Department of Defense in a Troops to Teachers program, which is now actually run by the Department of Defense with some consultative help from the Department of Education on how to help more veterans become teachers. And actually the data on the success of veterans who become teachers and what happens in their classrooms is remarkable. And so we also finally have been engaged in a set of efforts to think through what will help veterans not just get into college, which is largely the focus of the VOW Act work, but once they are in college, what will help them succeed in college. And we've had a convening in August around that, and in fact, some people in this room were there, including representatives from Norwich University, and perhaps others of you. We had another smaller meeting more recently at the Department of Education to think through how to help veterans succeed, how to leverage the information that we currently have to encourage, along with others who are also in this space, thinking about vet success on campus. And it's actually out of this effort that when I got back to Southern Vermont College about a month ago, I decided that my own campus had to do something more significant in thinking about vet success on campus. And so we had a program called Pipelines into Partnerships, which help vulnerable students by preparing them to go to college, supporting them while they're on college, but most particularly, they were chosen by their sending institutions. And that means that high schools picked the students who came to our college because they knew which ones would succeed and had fire in their bellies. And we've decided to adapt that program and are launching a veterans scholar cohort where commanding officers will pick the students who come to Southern Vermont College as a cohort. So I'm very proud that we're doing that. Cal State has something very similar, which they're doing, so we're pleased to follow in their footsteps. And Posse Foundation, which also has launched its first veteran Posse cohort, which will be at Vassar under the leadership of President Cappy Hill. There are a number of us who are thinking about ways to help veterans succeed on America's campuses. So I'm delighted the Department of Education is working on that, and it has influenced me as a college president.
I'll just close on that chart and say that the task force and the department recognize the importance of student veterans organizations and associations. That was going to be a career readiness standard that required a link up, but our lawyers advised us that might have been a step too far. However, we continue to press the need for those sorts of organizations to ensure better success for veterans once they are actually enrolled on campus.
And actually, part of this mentoring program is that for lots of service members who enter college as veterans, they do well with peer mentors, whether they're enrolled or available in the community. So coordination with community efforts, including student veterans organizations, is a key part of that.
We'll try and wrap this up because we want to leave a little bit of time for some questions. So we don't want to go over too much. But, you know, Rob and Carolyn and David talked about the principles of excellence yesterday. And in there is the charge to start measuring what are the metrics that we need to be looking at to take a look at our veteran students and what are those success metrics. We started looking at tracking information on student veterans across the board. We've gone back in the post 9/11 GI Bill and started tracking the retention of student veterans both on a full-time basis and a part-time basis, and it's been incredibly challenging. And the challenge to some degree is A, what is it that we measure and track, and B, do we have the systems and the ability to do that? Because when we implemented the post 9/11 GI Bill, the idea was not to develop a system that you could in fact use for success metrics. The system was developed to process claims so veterans could get paid and schools could get paid. So we're starting out with that. We're working with the National Student Clearinghouse, looking at Montgomery GI Bill success rates. We're also looking at, as Karen indicated, another outgrowth of this task force is a VA, DOD, and others as we go down the road, that gap analysis on what kind of things can we do to help veterans and service members on campus be successful. And I'll leave you this piece, if you will, and that is, think of the infrastructure that we already have in place. In Department of Education, they have 10 regional offices, and as Karen indicated, they have 15 centers of excellence grantees that are out there. In the VA, we have 152 hospitals, we have 300 vet centers, and we have 56 regional benefits offices across the country. Certainly within DOD, the number of military installations that are out there. And so if you start looking at this more strategically on what kind of things can we bring to bear with the existing resources that we already have to help student veterans and military veterans on campuses, we have a pretty large infrastructure. And so how do we leverage that infrastructure to help those student veterans and military members?
Let me just add to that it's really because of people like Kurt that we can now share this information and build together to leverage up our collective resources. And really the task force led to people working together, and I think that benefit is continuing beyond the actual implementation of the VOW Act. Let me just add two more points. The first is that data-informed decision-making undergirded everything that we did, and we view the TAP curriculum as an iterative process, so as we get feedback on it and on the virtual implementation, we will adjust the curriculum on a go-forward basis. And as Robert had pointed out, the TAP had not been changed in 19 years, and we see this changing as needed on a go-forward basis. In terms of the last bullet there about the principles of excellence and implementation, you heard about the principles of excellence yesterday. Obviously, as a college president, there are both time and cost efforts that are made part of those principles of excellence that fall to campuses that should not be ignored and that campuses have to think about how to fund. But I would say at the end of the day, that the goal of all of this, as it relates to education, is to provide an affordable education for servicemen and women that produces value for their effort. And so all that we can do to make that happen, I think, is not only consistent with what we're trying to achieve in higher ed more generally, but is what will benefit our servicemen and women as they exit the service, and we honor their service to our nation.
Do we have time for a couple questions, if any, or not, or? It's kind of hard to see from out here, so raise your hand or speak up.
I'm Bruce Brunson. I'm from Tidewater Community College. And
Hi, Bruce.
We have one of the best success college, and it's an outstanding program. One of my biggest things, we have 5,000 veterans, 2,000 active duty, and 7,000 family members on campus. And so we've been doing this a long time. And when people come to me and say, what's the number one failure? We have our list, and you haven't touched any of them. The first thing is, for example, is we really need to look at the fact that we have people showing up at midterm with no books because the VA funds are not there. There's a cycle that are coming to VA funds. Does anybody at other college have that problem? Okay? Show up at midterm with no bug. The other one is the way that it works. We have them take out federal loans, which they should do for a lot of reasons. And the reason they have to do it is because the VA funds don't come by the drop date. They pull the federal funds. The VA comes back, and next thing you know, we have people with 2 months of not paying. The credits dropped, they're kicked out, and they're evicted. Now, we have this from firsthand. We have no stats on it. The other one that's really killing us, and I do the research along that, and from the last 2 years, we averaged 20% pass rate on math. The rest go into developmental math. And we also know from studies that if they go into developmental math, they're either going to use a semester, a year, or 2 years of their VA benefits, and they're going to drop out. So there's research on that. One of the interesting part about it is the reason they don't pass the math. I'm sorry, I'm giving an impromptu lecture here, but this is something you didn't hit on any of these. Is that when they go in to take the math prep, they have to do pen and pencil. When was the last time any of us did pen and pencil algebra or math? There's not a programs out there to prep them to go take a math. Now the reading is 80% pass rate and the writing 60%. So they're not prepped by the time they get out to go into math. And so it's almost an instant dropout when they go through to get in there. The other one, and one more that I'm doing, I'm giving a presentation on this all tomorrow, by the way. That's an ad for me, but yeah, you won't have to go now. We are advising our veterans and active duty into failure. And this goes into what we're advising them in and using into academics, degrees, certificates, and whatever, and not looking at their skill sets that are so evident through their ASVABs, their placement tests, and some others. And that's a short one, and my question is, how can you help us?
I'll take the last one first.
Okay.
As part of their transition GPS, they look at their MOC crosswalk, and I apologize for that being an acronym, but that's whatever your military skill set was, it translates it into a comparable set of civilian occupations. So it looks at everything you did in the military and helps you make an assessment of where are you in terms of doing that in the career field, in the civilian field, and do you still want to do that? So you go through an extensive assessment process that's been significantly revamped. We just had facilitator training for that starting 2 weeks ago so that the facilitators delivering that workshop were better prepared to ensure that one of those first key critical steps that you mentioned so correctly, that service members were making correct choices about what they wanted to go into. So I think the assessment process, the gap analysis, the reason it's called transition goals, plans, and success is to focus on the fact that you have to come up with some realistic goals, make a plan to attain them, execute that plan, and you'll see success.
Let me talk about course readiness, which is now more fully embedded within the Transition Assistance Program, so that if you want to choose the education track, you will have to have done some of the preparatory work, academic preparatory work. So there's an effort to back up when this whole Transition Assistance Program starts. Rather than giving it to service members in the last week or two before they exit. The idea is to back it up 9 to 12 months, if not further, so that they can avoid the very issues that you're describing now. So when they do their own assessment plans, actually readiness in courses like math and English is embedded in there now. Now, there's only a group since November that started to do that, and the education track has only been piloted. It hasn't been fully implemented, and likely won't be implemented till later this year or early into next year. But we recognized that deficiency, including the defects in developmental education, which are problematic on every level. And just so you know, on a totally separate note, the Department of Education just issued a new group of materials on developmental education and how to think about them. And the sort of long and short of that whole publication, which is available on the department's website, is that no single inoculation prepares students effectively. So a summer bridge program isn't enough. A one-time math uptick course isn't enough. You need continuous and ongoing support systems to close the developmental gap. Let me just add one more thing to that, that some of these cohort models actually do a brush up on academic skills before the students enter campus, or do simultaneous development with taking of the actual course, so that there isn't the kind of problem that you describe. And I leave the funding issues to Kurt.
Well, thanks, Bruce, for your passion. We share the same passion, quite frankly. I'll talk just a minute about the claims piece and payment to veterans. This past fall, we all recognized that we had a huge problem. We had a huge backlog. We were way too slow in getting payments out to schools and students. We can talk about the reasons why increased number of veterans going to school. We can talk about the VRAP program, which the same claims processors are processing 100,000 VRAP claims and those kinds of things. But the fact is we didn't do it as well as we should have, might have, could have. Apart from that, we're also looking at, and have done, and I hope that you've not seen the hue and cry this January for the spring semester that we had in the sort of August, September, October, November-ish timeframe for the fall. And part of that is because we've automated a large chunk of our process. In round numbers, 70 to 80 to 85% of all our education claims business is supplemental claims. And supplemental claims is what pays veteran students their housing allowance and their books and fees allowance. We have developed a process and an automation that of that 70–80% of all claims that are supplemental claims, we are now processing around 45 to 50% of those supplemental claims automatically with no human touching them at all. So we've seen our days of processing claims come down rather dramatically, and it's holding now for supplemental claims of an average of about 5.5 days or so. Is that about right, Rob? 5.5 days? And so there's that piece, and it's then leaving assets and resources available to process original claims from that aspect. And so we think we've resolved a good chunk of that. People often ask, so I'll just answer the question, okay, well, you're doing 45 to 50%, how come you're not doing, what happened to the other 50%? And the short answer is, one, some of those claims that are submitted are paper, so they're not, so we have to process them. Two, the automation that we have is not for college degree programs, and so those technical programs that the post 9/11 GI Bill do are not automated. And three, there are off-ramps for a number of different things because we want to make sure that we're good stewards of the taxpayer money and not all things go through there. I will add, though, of that other chunk that is not fully automated, up to about 35% is partially automated. So our claims examiners aren't having to fill in boxes manually. It's done automatically, but it's off-ramp for any one of those sort of reasons. I don't know if that answered part of your question or not.
But I want to also add, we've been working with the VA, and the Transition Assistance Program also pushes for federal financial aid as opposed to private loans, because there has not been adequate awareness of the availability of money from the Department of Education, which is cheaper and better than many of the private loan alternatives that are offered to service men and women, whether by the institution themselves or by private lenders. So there's a very big push, including in the Principles of Excellence, to use Title IV money or Pell eligibility if applicable.
But again, it's just one of those things. You can ask your question, but this whole task force spurred a lot of this kind of activity. It spurred a lot of the principles of excellence that are there to make sure that our military and student veterans don't get behind that debt, 8-ball that sometimes we see and hear about.
I think the revamping of the TAP class to the transition GPS is a great thing. One question I have is, when it comes to the 3 different tracks that the soldiers or service members are able to take, did you also provide the curriculum and material that they would need, or are you leaving that to each installation to develop their own curriculum of what should be taught during those 3 tracks before they complete the process?
That's a very good question. The task force spent a significant amount of effort to ensure that each of the 3 tracks were developed as a curriculum that Karen described. The Small Business Administration developed the entrepreneurship track. That track was piloted last summer. Very successful implementation, not only nationwide but overseas. 2-day track, like I described, followed up by extensive online training, go all the way to your business development plan to ensure success in that track. The technical training track and the higher education tracks, the technical training track is in the process of being finalized at this point. The higher education was developed, piloted. The curriculum, the facilitator training for that track starts in a couple weeks, so that we'll ensure that facilitators across the services are well trained and versed in that new curriculum and are able to deliver quality product.
In addition, that the Department of Education is going to the higher ed training to talk about federal financial aid. The curriculum is consistent by design across all services and all delivery systems to ensure consistency.
I have a question for the Department of Education. The specific that you were giving regarding preparing the soldiers, the airmen, Marines, sailors, regarding education, are you implying that you want them to take college courses, or is that something that's going to be offered as remediation on the bases? The reason for this is most state colleges and universities, the minute they take one community college class, they now have to do 60 transferable units. They have to go to community college. Most of those are impacted. It is going to take them more than 2 years to get out of the community college with those units to be able to transfer to the 4-year degree level.
So this isn't a Department of Education mandate. The effort is to have the servicemen and women take whatever courses they need while they are in the military through tuition assistance to get them ready for college. And in fact, in some services, they're already doing that, like the Air Force is an example of that through the Community College of the Air Force. So the idea also is to test their readiness, apropos of the question before, how advanced are they in math and English, so that they're more career ready. As to the transferability of what they do into academic credits when they exit the military, whether they've taken college courses or other kinds of military-based courses, is a different question and clearly a problematic one. But not all four-year colleges are unwilling to accept community college credits. There are many that will, but right. I mean, it's very variable across the country, but the goal was not to curb their access to four-year institutions. The goal was to make them college ready.
Does this work? I think we're going to be winding it down. I wanted to end with one question because here at CCME we're a lot of online schools, and I'm just wondering if there's still consideration about the housing allowance being equal in terms of what the housing allowance is for online versus on-campus programs.
That's in statute.
So it won't, I just didn't know if you've heard any.
I personally have not heard of any movement otherwise. Rob, I don't know if you've heard of any or not. He's shaking his head. We talk too many times a day, but so I'm not aware of any pending legislation concerning that. Fair statement, Rob?
I think that's a fair statement. If you don't know, you don't know. Did you want to? This is probably a topic we could all really talk about all day long, especially when you have people of this caliber up here. So we appreciate your time to be here, and I wish we had more time with you. So thank you very much. You'll exit to this way. Linda has this for you. Thank you very much. I was told to ask that question for the group, so I asked.
No, it's okay.
Thank you very much. Okay, you have concurrent sessions start at 3, so you have time to go up to the exhibit hall and grab a snack and make it to your 3 o'clock session. And then again, we will be meeting. The board will be off before all of you, but Access, who is our event coordinator for this evening, will be at the escalators, letting you know where you need to go to get your transportation to go to our banquet this evening. So unless there's any other questions, we'll just see you at the banquet.